Snow fell thickly, blanketing the city's wide streets as if the entire world were sinking into a cold white quilt. Clara, 27, a nurse at the city hospital, stepped off the last bus of the night. Her thick winter coat did little to block the bone-deep chill of winter. It was nearly midnight. Her hospital shift had just ended, leaving behind the familiar weight of exhaustion. The main street still glowed with neon lights, but in this suburban corner, the brightness faded into darkness, giving way to silence and the soft crunch of snow beneath her feet. She stopped at the old bus stop, its rusted tin roof rattling with every gust of wind, shaking loose clumps of snow. This stop was Clara's nightly ritual, a place where she would pause for a few minutes to catch her breath before walking the last few hundred meters home. But tonight, something made her stop short. On the wooden bench covered in a thin layer of snow, a man sat slumped forward, head bowed low, dark hair matted with melting snow. His clothes, though smeared with dirt and snow, looked expensive, a cashmere coat torn in places, dark slacks stained with damp patches. His once shiny leather shoes were soaked through, dulled and grimy, as if he had been sitting there for hours, motionless in the blizzard. Clara hesitated, tightening her grip on the strap of her worn fabric bag. She wasn't the type to get involved in other people's business. Her life as a low-paid nurse was complicated enough: long shifts, unpaid bills, and a rundown wooden house that needed constant fixing. But something about this man kept her from walking away. Maybe it was the way his hands trembled as he hugged himself, trying to keep the cold from seeping into his bones. Maybe it was the emptiness in his eyes when he glanced at her, a look that passed right through her without really seeing anything. She took a deep breath, her exhale turning into a cloud of white in the frozen air. "Can you hear me?" Clara called out, her voice gentle but strong enough to rise over the wind's howl. She stepped closer, her shoes leaving faint footprints in the snow. The man didn't respond at first, just stirred slightly, as if only now realizing she was there. His eyes, dark brown, lifted slowly, glazed with fatigue and confusion. "Please don't make me leave." His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper, worn out as though those few words had drained him. "Just one night. I'll be gone." Clara frowned, studying him more carefully. He didn't look like a typical homeless man. Despite his dirty clothes, the way he sat, the way his hands clutched his coat, as if holding on to a last shred of pride, it all made her feel like he didn't belong here. Not at this broken-down bus stop, not in this frozen storm. But she wasn't naive. Not in a city like this, where sad stories lurked on every street corner, and not all were worth the risk. She looked down the road where the glow of the departing bus had vanished, leaving only swirling white. No more buses were coming, and it was cold, so cold her breath had begun to tremble. If she left him here, she might read tomorrow about an unidentified man frozen to death in the night. Clara wasn't sure she could live with that. She drew a deeper breath this time, for courage. "You can't stay here," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Come with me." The man raised his head, eyes flickering with surprise, as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. Clara didn't wait for a response. She brushed snow off her coat, adjusted the bag on her shoulder, and motioned for him to follow. "Hurry up before we both freeze solid." He rose slowly, his tall frame swaying unsteadily, as if on the verge of collapse. Clara realized he was taller than she expected, probably close to 6'3", but the cold and exhaustion made him look smaller, diminished. He said nothing, just followed her silently, his soaked shoes squishing with every step through the thick snow. The walk home felt longer than usual, not just because of the snow, but because of the heavy silence between them. Clara walked ahead, her shoes sinking into the slush, while he trailed a few steps behind. Every now and then, she glanced back to make sure he was still there. He was head-bowed, his figure a ghostly silhouette in the storm. Snow clung to his coat like it was trying to cover up whatever story he carried with him. Clara's wooden house appeared at the end of the snow-covered dirt road, small but warm-looking amid the white haze. Golden light spilled from the window, like a candle flickering in the darkness. She opened the gate, the snow crunching beneath her feet, then turned to look at the man. He stood under the faint glow of the street lamp, snow blanketing his shoulders and hair. For the first time, Clara noticed something strange about him, something beautiful, in a quiet, haunting way. Not the polished kind of beauty from TV screens, but the kind that belonged to someone who had once had everything and lost it all in a single moment. "Come in," she said, pushing the creaky wooden door open. "But just so you know, there's nothing fancy in my house. You're watching Soul Stories, where every story whispers of love, healing, and hope. Let us know which city you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and be a part of our journey. Now stay with us. The story is just beginning." Clara pushed open the old wooden door, its creaky hinges groaning into the stillness. The man followed behind her, his soaked shoes leaving wet trails across the floor. He froze in the middle of the room, shoulders slumped, as if the cold from the bus stop still clung tightly to his body. "Sit there," Clara said, pointing to the wooden chair by the kitchen table, her voice soft but firm. "I'll get a towel and make some tea." He nodded and sat down slowly, his eyes unfocused, lost in a world she couldn't reach. The house had belonged to Clara's grandmother, who had passed away 3 years ago. It was small, old but warm, its aged wooden floorboards marked by time, and a stone fireplace crackling gently in the corner. Out back was a tiny porch where her grandmother used to grow white chrysanthemums, now likely buried beneath the snow. Clara loved this place, even with its constant need for repairs, a leaky roof, squeaky windows, but it was the only place where she truly felt at peace. In the modest kitchen, Clara set a kettle on the gas stove and took out dried ginger and honey from an old ceramic jar. She glanced at the man. He sat motionless, his trembling hands resting on the table. He didn't belong here, Clara thought, but she didn't ask. She rummaged through the wooden cupboard and pulled out a thick navy sweater and a cotton towel left behind by her grandfather. "Change into these," she said, placing them in front of him. "Wet clothes will make you sick." He murmured a hoarse "thank you." Clara drew the curtain between the kitchen and the rest of the room to give him some privacy, then turned back to the kettle. The water bubbled and hissed, mixing with the soft crackle of wood in the fireplace. She poured the ginger tea into 2 chipped porcelain mugs, setting one in front of him. He had changed into the sweater. It fit loosely on his tall frame, but the hollowness in his eyes remained, as if his soul had long since drifted away. Clara sat across from him, clutching the warm mug to thaw her frozen fingers. She wanted to ask his name, ask why he was out there, but the heavy silence between them held her back. She wasn't used to talking to strangers, especially someone who looked like he'd lost everything. "I'm Clara," she finally said gently. "Do you need to call someone?" He shook his head firmly. "There's no one," he said, his voice so low it almost dissolved into the air. Just then, a crumpled envelope slipped from his hand onto the floor with a faint tap. Clara bent down to pick it up, intending to hand it back, but it had already come open. A photograph and a wedding invitation spilled out. The photo showed him younger, radiant in a black suit, embracing a beautiful blonde woman in a white dress. The invitation read, "James Bennett and Vivian Langley." The wedding date had passed just weeks ago. Clara looked up and met his gaze, now fractured and raw. "She and my cousin took everything," he said, voice thick and broken, each word pulled from a wound too deep to close. Clara didn't answer. She placed the photo and invitation on the table, then stood and pretended to busy herself with adding more wood to the fire. She didn't want to push him, didn't want to dig into pain she'd only just glimpsed. But that sentence and the look in his eyes told her there was a much bigger story buried beneath the ruins of the man sitting in her kitchen. The fireplace in Clara's small wooden house crackled softly, casting golden-orange light across the worn wooden walls, creating flickering shadows that danced in the warmth. Clara sat in an old armchair near the fire, holding a mug of now lukewarm ginger tea, her eyes occasionally drifting to the man James, as the wedding invitation had revealed, still sitting motionless on the couch. The engagement photo and wedding card lay on the kitchen table, one corner of the photo torn, as if it too were falling apart. James hadn't touched the tea Clara had set before him. His hands, now warmer thanks to her grandfather's old sweater, clutched the photo tightly, his thumb unconsciously brushing over the face of the blonde woman in the picture. His eyes were vacant, but deep within them swirled a storm not of anger, but a profound despair, as though everything he once had been ripped away, leaving behind a black void nothing could fill. Clara wanted to say something, but didn't know where to start. She didn't ask, didn't push. She just sat there, letting the silence blend with the pop of firewood and the wind howling beyond the windows. James stirred slightly, his gaze drifting from the photo to the small room. He looked at the fireplace, then at the snow-covered window, as if trying to pull himself out of memory. But memories like snowflakes clung to him, refusing to let go. Just a few months ago, James Bennett was a rising star in the business world. At 32, he was the youngest CEO of Bennett Innovations, a tech empire he built from bold ideas and sleepless nights. The board called him a genius. Investors lined up to fund his projects, and the media couldn't stop praising him. But to James, the real pinnacle had been the night he knelt before Vivian Langley in an upscale riverside restaurant, offering her a diamond ring that sparkled beneath candlelight. She smiled through tears and said, "Yes." That night, he believed he had reached everything he had ever dreamed of. The engagement was set to be announced at a grand event, a lavish party with top names in the business world. James had planned it all: the speech, the floral arrangements, even a surprise light show for Vivian. But the night before the event, everything collapsed. Lucas, James' cousin, someone he had always considered a brother, appeared in his private office. Tall, charismatic, with a sharp gaze and easy smile, Lucas had long been the one James trusted most on the board, but that night his eyes were cold. He dropped a stack of documents on the desk: falsified contracts, distorted financial reports, all under James's name. "You were too ambitious, James," Lucas said calmly. "The board doesn't trust you anymore." Before James could respond, Vivian entered, dressed like she was ready for the celebration. But her gaze was no longer filled with love. "We're done," she said, voice like ice. "Lucas will take over. He deserves it more." James stood frozen, as if the entire world had cracked open beneath him. Vivian, the woman he loved, and Lucas, the cousin he trusted, had secretly plotted to overthrow him. The board members who once patted his back turned away almost instantly. His assets were frozen, accounts shut down, and by morning, headlines blared across the media. Young CEO James Bennett, fraud or victim. He wandered through frozen city streets with no home, no direction. At first, he slept in 24-hour cafes, then park benches, then bus stops like the one where Clara found him. He no longer remembered how far he'd walked. Each step felt like dragging the weight of a collapsed world behind him. Back in the warm wooden house, James bowed his head, fingers still gripping the engagement photo. The torn edge mirrored the ruin of his life. "I don't have a reason to exist anymore," he whispered, voice breaking, as if speaking more to himself than to Clara. Clara, still seated in her armchair, felt her heart tighten. She didn't know the whole story, but the pain in his voice told her he had lost more than wealth or reputation. She rose quietly, walked to the fireplace, pretending to check the fire just to hide her emotions. "You need to sleep," she said gently but firmly. "It's warm here. Just rest. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." James didn't reply, only gave a slight nod, his eyes still locked on the photo. Clara pulled the blanket over the couch, added another log to the fire, then stepped quietly into the kitchen. She looked out the window where snow continued to fall, covering the chrysanthemums on the back porch in white. She didn't know if she could truly help him, but she knew one thing. Tonight, at least, he wouldn't have to sleep out in the freezing cold. The next morning, pale light filtered through the window of Clara's wooden house, casting a soft glow on the thin layer of snow blanketing the back porch, where her grandmother's white chrysanthemums slumbered in winter's hush. Only a few embers remained in the fireplace. Clara woke early, as always, to get ready for her morning shift at the hospital. She tiptoed past the couch where James slept, the old blanket pulled up to his chin, his hollow face softened slightly in sleep. She didn't wake him. Instead, she added wood to the fireplace and quietly set a plate of toast, a steaming cup of ginger tea, and a small note on the kitchen table. In her slightly crooked handwriting, it read, "You can stay a few days if you'd like. Don't worry, I don't mind. Clara." She slipped on her thick coat, pulled a knit hat over her ears, and stepped outside, her boots sinking into the fresh snow on the dirt road leading to the bus stop. James's words from the night before, "She and my cousin took everything," still echoed in her mind. But Clara hadn't asked for more. She understood that some wounds needed time to heal, and her curiosity was far less important than giving him space to breathe. This old house, though filled with creaky windows and cracked walls, had once brought her peace after her own losses. Perhaps, she thought, it could offer James the same. By late morning, James stirred as soft sunlight filtered through the snow, reflecting off the polished wooden floor. He sat up, the blanket falling away to reveal Clara's grandfather's dark blue sweater, slightly too big for his frame. The engagement photo and wedding invitation still sat on the kitchen table, but he didn't reach for them. Instead, his eyes fell on Clara's note. He read the simple lines, his fingers brushing over the ink as if they were a lifeline pulling him back from the edge. He took the ginger tea in his hands, the warmth seeping into his cold fingers, but only sipped once before setting it down. He sat for hours, staring at the flickering embers in the fireplace, his gaze distant, like a shadow unsure of where it belonged. That evening, when Clara returned home from her shift, she assumed he'd left. But when she opened the door, he was still there, staring into the fire. She stepped inside and he looked up and spoke softly. "I don't have anywhere else to go. You said I could stay." His voice faltered. Clara gave a small smile. "I'm going to make something to eat. Do you want anything? I have eggs, noodles, potatoes." He shook his head. She glanced toward the table where she had left breakfast. Only a small piece of toast and 2/3 of the tea had been touched. She had eaten dinner with her co-workers, assuming he would be gone. Now she decided to make potato soup for him. When it was ready, she brought him a bowl. He refused at first, but she said, "Don't make me insist. I'd hate for anyone to say I let you go hungry under my roof, so just eat, okay?" He sat there, eating the soup slowly, spoon by spoon, his movements absent. They exchanged only a few brief words before each retreating to their sleeping spaces. The next morning, Clara left for work early again. Each day, she maintained the same quiet routine. Every morning before leaving, she left food on the table: toast, reheated potato soup, or a simple bowl of rice porridge. James ate very little, sometimes just nibbling on bread or sipping a few spoonfuls of soup before abandoning the rest. Clara returned home after dark. He was always there, seated silently on the couch, rarely speaking beyond a hoarse "thank you." She didn't press. She cleaned the house, added wood to the fire, and let him be part of the silence. She noticed that he no longer looked at the engagement photo as often, though it still sat there, like a wound that hadn't closed. A week passed since James had arrived. That afternoon, Clara returned earlier than usual, as the fading light of sunset glowed over the snow-covered porch. To her surprise, the fire in the hearth was burning brighter, the pile of firewood neatly stacked instead of scattered. Even the path to the front door had been shoveled clear, revealing the dirt road beneath. James wasn't on the couch. She found him out back, in the old sweater, shoveling snow off the path that led to the fence. Snow clung to his hair and shoulders, but he worked with quiet focus, as if each motion of the shovel helped hold him together. Clara stood watching, her hands tightening around the straps of her bag. "You don't have to do that," she said gently but clearly. "I can manage." James paused, leaning on the shovel, his breath forming clouds in the frosty air. "These little things," he said, his voice hoarse but steadier. "They make me feel like I still exist." Clara didn't respond. She simply nodded, then returned to the kitchen to start dinner. A small spark of hope flickered in her chest. These quiet acts, however simple, were signs that he was reaching for life again. In the days that followed, James continued repairing the broken wooden fence out back, using old nails and a rusted hammer from the shed. He patched the leaking porch roof, where snowmelt had once dripped steadily. Each task was done slowly, with care, as if he were relearning how to live. Clara didn't say anything. She just observed, occasionally setting a hot cup of tea beside him while he worked in the cold. Tonight, Clara came home early and cooked a simple meal: warm vegetable soup with carrots, potatoes, and a sprinkle of cilantro, served with toasted bread. For the first time, James sat at the kitchen table with her, instead of eating alone on the couch. They ate in silence, broken only by the clink of spoons and the gentle crackling of the fire. After the meal, James stood up and carried the dishes to the sink. "Let me," he said, voice low but firm. Clara started to protest, but the look in his eyes stopped her. He washed the dishes slowly, as if the action itself grounded him. Clara stood beside him, drying the dishes he passed her. As she placed the last plate into the cabinet, she spoke softly but with quiet strength. "You don't have to do this. You don't owe me anything. Just don't give up." James paused, his hands still in the soapy water, and met her gaze for a brief moment. He didn't answer right away, just gave a small nod. But Clara could feel it. Something in him had shifted. He placed the last dish down, dried his hands on an old towel, then sat back at the kitchen table. "You want to know why I'm here, don't you?" he said, voice low, as if talking more to himself than to her. Clara sat across from him, not pushing, just quietly waiting. And James began to speak about being James Bennett, CEO of a tech empire, about his engagement to Vivian, the betrayal by her and his cousin Lucas, how everything he had built collapsed overnight. His voice cracked at times, his story fragmented, but he kept talking as if speaking was a way to release some of the weight he'd carried. Clara listened without interrupting. When he finished, his eyes drifted once more to the engagement photo on the table, now pushed off to the side. Clara gently placed her hand over his, a quiet gesture of understanding. She didn't say anything, but the warmth of her touch spoke louder than words that here, in this house, he wasn't alone. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the porch in white. But inside the small wooden house, a new warmth had begun to flicker, like a fragile flame, burning softly in the middle of winter's night. Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. The next morning, Clara had already left for her hospital shift before sunrise. The night before, James had shown signs of a cold sneezing repeatedly, so before leaving, Clara placed a plate of toast, a steaming cup of ginger tea, and a small bottle of cold medicine on the kitchen table, along with a note. "Take this if you're feeling sick. I'll be home late today. Clara." James sat on the couch, hands wrapped around the cup, his gaze no longer as lost as it had been in the early days, though still heavy with a deep, quiet sorrow. Clara's words from the night before, "You don't owe me anything. Just don't give up," echoed in his mind like a steady rhythm, pulling him out of the darkness. He set the cup down and looked at the engagement photo still lying on the table. Then, without hesitation, he picked it up and tossed it into the burning fireplace. James stood and walked to the small wooden table in the corner of the room, where Clara had left an old cell phone, one of those basic models used for calls and texts. He had noticed it days ago when she'd left a note explaining how to use it. "If you need to call someone, go ahead," she'd said, her voice gentle, like she didn't want to pressure him. He picked up the phone, his thumb hovering over the number pad. How long had it been since he'd contacted anyone? But Clara's words, like a small flame, pushed him forward. He dialed Daniel's number, the one person he still trusted, his longtime lawyer, the man who had drafted the first contracts for Bennett Innovations. "Hello, Daniel speaking," came the warm, steady voice after a few rings. James took a deep breath. His voice was raspy. "Daniel, it's me, James Bennett." There was a pause on the other end. "James, my God, you're alive. People said you'd, disappeared. Where are you?" Daniel's voice was filled with concern and a hint of relief. "I'm safe for now," James replied, his eyes drifting to the snowy window. "I need your help. Lucas and Vivian, they took everything, but I need to know if there's still a chance." Daniel sighed. "You've been off the grid for a month, James. The media's gone wild. But let me check. Lucas took control quickly, but I suspect he hasn't finalized everything. A significant portion of your shares in Bennett Innovations is still in your name, temporarily frozen, but not transferred. If we act fast, you could take back control." James stared at the table, heart pounding. "Take it back? After everything the press has said about me? They called me a fraud, Daniel." Daniel sipped his coffee on the other end, voice calm but sharp. "The press is just noise. We'll find proof that Lucas and Vivian falsified the financials. But you've got to do something, James. Not just to get the company back, you need to start over. From zero if you have to. James nodded, knowing Daniel couldn't see it. I'll do it. I just don't know where to begin. Then start small, Daniel said, a slight smile in his voice. You once built an empire from an idea. You can do it again. That evening, Clara returned home in the dark, her boots crunching on the snow-covered dirt path. She was surprised to find James not on the couch, as usual. Instead, he was at the kitchen table, spreading out papers and scribbling with a pen. A stack of documents and the old cell phone lay nearby. Clara set down her bag and took off her coat. "What are you working on?" she asked gently. James looked up, and for the first time his eyes held a spark. "I'm making plans, a new company. Small for now, but I want to try again." He nodded toward the documents. "My lawyer says I still have a chance." Clara smiled, soft and warm, her eyes glinting under the kitchen light. "You built an empire once. You'll do it again." James stared at her, surprised by the certainty in her voice. "You don't really know me, Clara. I lost everything. How can you believe I can do this again?" Clara sat across from him, holding the cup of tea she'd just poured. "I don't need to know your whole story," she said, her voice steady and sincere. "I just see a man who didn't let the cold out there beat him. You patched the roof, shoveled snow, washed dishes. Small things, but they matter. If you can do that, you can do more." James was silent, his eyes studying her face, those gentle brown eyes. The loose hair tucked behind one ear, the smile like a quiet flame in the winter night. "You're not like anyone I've ever met," he said hoarsely. "I don't even know if I deserve this kindness." "No one has to deserve help," Clara replied, rising to begin dinner. "As long as you don't give up, that's enough." In the days that followed, James began working in earnest. He spent hours at the kitchen table, sketching ideas for a new tech company, something smaller, focused on medical software solutions, a field he had once been passionate about but never fully explored. After her shifts, Clara often sat with him, listening to him explain his ideas, even when the terminology went over her head. She brought home old newspapers from the hospital, helping him cut out articles about the market. One late night, she placed a glass of warm milk in front of him. "Don't overwork yourself," she said with a smile. "You need to stay strong if you're going to build that new empire." James chuckled softly the first time Clara had seen him smile. "You really are a dedicated nurse," he teased. "Thank you, Clara, for everything." Clara nodded and turned away, hiding the smile forming on her own lips. Outside the window, the snow continued to fall, but inside the wooden house, the fire of hope was burning brighter than ever. A week later, the snowfall had softened. James sat at the table, a stack of documents from Daniel in hand. The page where he had once scribbled his business idea was now filled with notes about medical software, product features, and a modest business plan. The day before, Daniel had called with news. An old acquaintance of James, an engineer who once worked with him at Bennett Innovations, was offering a small apartment in the suburbs for cheap rent. "It's nothing fancy," Daniel said with a hint of teasing, "but it's enough to get started. You need a place, James." James had nodded to himself. The apartment, humble as it was, offered him something vital, a first step toward rebuilding from the ground up. A week later, James moved into the apartment, just a short walk from Clara's house. It was on the second floor of an aging building with creaky wooden stairs and a window that overlooked a snowy side street. The place had only one main room, a small kitchen corner, and a narrow bathroom. But to James, it was a beginning. He brought with him a few things from Clara's house, her grandfather's sweater, a notebook, a pen, and Daniel's documents. His desk was an old wooden table left behind by the landlord, lit by a dim lamp and piled with messy papers. It wasn't the sleek office of Bennett Innovations, but for the first time in weeks, James felt a glimmer of hope. He was beginning to believe he could do this. Clara, after long shifts at the hospital, often dropped by in the evenings. She always brought food, vegetable soup, fresh bread, sometimes a hot bowl of rice porridge. "You need to eat to stay strong," she'd say, placing the bag on his tiny kitchen counter. James would give her a faint smile. "You don't have to do this, Clara. I've been enough of a burden." "Think of it as an investment in a future CEO," she'd reply, her eyes twinkling under the soft kitchen light. She'd sit in the old folding chair and start organizing his scattered papers. These need to be sorted, James. If you're starting a company, the least you can do is have tidy paperwork. James gave a light laugh, the first real one Clara had seen from him. You really are a dedicated nurse, he teased. Not just healing people, but saving my paperwork, too. Clara shrugged, eyes still on the documents. I'm used to cleaning up chaos. Hospital or office, it's not that different. They worked in companionable silence, broken only by the rustle of paper and the whisper of snow falling outside. Clara sorted contracts, notes, and concept sketches, while James sat across from her, updating his business plan. The air between them felt easy, like two old friends, even though they had only known each other for less than a month. That night, Clara arrived later than usual, her hair damp from snow, cheeks flushed from the cold. She carried a pot of hot soup, its aroma warming the small apartment. The hospital was packed today, she said, setting the pot on the stove. But I wasn't about to let you starve. James got up to help her with the bowls. Aren't you exhausted, Clara? Running here every night after work and cooking for me too? She smiled, ladling soup into bowls. Tired? Sure, but I'm used to it. Besides, someone has to make sure you remember to eat. She pushed a bowl toward him and sat down across the table. They ate in silence, listening to the clink of spoons and the wind outside. After the meal, Clara returned to the pile of documents, but her eyelids began to droop. She rested her chin in her hand, a paper still between her fingers, and slowly drifted off. Her hair slipped from its tie, covering part of her face, and her gentle breaths blended into the quiet of the room. James paused his writing, his eyes settling on her. Under the dim light, she looked small and fragile, but also impossibly strong. He thought of the past few weeks, how she'd left bread and tea for him, fixed the fence with him, believed in him with no reason to. In a world where everything he once trusted Vivian, Lucas, his reputation had collapsed. Clara had asked nothing from him. She had simply reached out a hand. For the first time in months, James felt true peace, as if, even with a shattered heart, there was still space for light. He stood, pulled an old blanket from the couch, and gently draped it over her shoulders. Clara stirred slightly but didn't wake. James sat down and watched her, thinking quietly, "You're the only thing I still believe in." The thought flickered inside him, like a tiny flame in the winter night. He didn't know if he could rebuild an empire as Clara believed, but he knew one thing. For her, he wanted to try. In the days that followed, James threw himself into the work. He reached out to a few former investors, some still had faith in him. Daniel helped him draft contracts for his new company, a small startup focused on medical software, just as James had once dreamed. Clara continued to visit each night, bringing hot food and her gentle presence. "You're doing great," she said one evening. That day, James had signed his first contract with a small local hospital. It wasn't a huge deal, but it marked his first real step back. When he told Clara, she insisted they celebrate. She returned home to cook a special dinner and brought it to his office. They sat there eating and drinking tea. "I told you," Clara said, smiling, "you'd make it." James looked at her, his eyes softer than before. "If it weren't for you, Clara, I don't know where I'd be. Probably still at that bus stop." Clara shook her head and smiled. "Well, you're here now, and that's what matters." She stood to leave. "I'll bring potato soup tomorrow. Don't stay up too late, okay?" James nodded, watching her disappear behind the door, a dusting of snow clinging to her coat. Outside, snow still fell, but inside the small apartment, a quiet light was growing like the flame inside James, gently lit by Clara's kindness. In the small, cluttered apartment, the dim desk lamp cast a soft glow over the stack of documents on the wooden table. James sat quietly, fingers tracing the edge of a new contract, his eyes shining with a glimmer of hope he hadn't felt since that freezing night at the bus stop. His new company had signed a few more deals, and he now had 4 employees working under him. The old phone on the desk buzzed. Daniel's voice, excited and almost breathless, came through the line. "James, have you heard the news? Lucas is under investigation for financial fraud. He was taken into custody this morning." James gripped the phone, his heart racing. "Are you serious? For what exactly?" he asked, his voice unsteady, not quite ready to believe it. The falsified reports he used to overthrow you, Daniel replied. A former employee from Bennett Innovations came forward and gave investigators everything. Lucas didn't just seize control, he embezzled millions. He's done, James. James leaned back in his chair and took a deep breath. The image of Lucas, his cousin, once his closest ally during the early startup days, flashed in his mind. But now he was nothing more than a shadow of betrayal. That betrayal had nearly destroyed him. But now, it was paving the way for something new. Thank you, Daniel, James said quietly. And the deal with the health corporation? Daniel chuckled. They just sent the confirmation email. Med Global wants to partner with your company. Multi-million-dollar contract, James. You did it. James ended the call, his hands still trembling as he set the phone down. He looked around the apartment, the old table, scattered documents, the folding chair where Clara often sat to help him sort paperwork. Just a few months ago, he'd been a shadow, stranded at a bus stop, homeless and hopeless. Now he was standing at a turning point. He wanted to tell Clara, who had pulled him out of the darkness, not with grand speeches, but with quiet, persistent kindness. A mug of ginger tea, a plate of toast, a soft smile. That evening, James left the apartment early, a copy of the Med Global contract in hand proof that he was no longer the man who'd been left behind. When he pushed open the old wooden door, its hinges groaning as always, warmth filled the house. Clara was in the kitchen, probably preparing dinner. She looked up, her soft brown eyes glowing under the kitchen light. "You're home early," she said with a smile. "Something happened. You look different." James placed the contract on the table, unable to hide his grin. "Clara, Lucas was arrested. He's being investigated for fraud. And my company just signed a huge contract with Med Global. Millions. I can't believe it actually happened." Clara paused, spoon mid-stir in the soup pot, then turned to face him, her eyes lighting up. "Really? James, that's amazing." She stepped forward, took his hand, and smiled like the fireplace itself had come alive. "I told you you'd make it." James laughed, a real laugh, free and unguarded. "If it weren't for you, Clara, I don't know where I'd be. Probably still out there, buried in snow at that old bus stop." He paused, his gaze softening. "You were the only one who believed in me, even when I couldn't believe in myself." Clara shook her head gently, her cheeks flushed with joy. "Don't say that. You just needed not to give up." They stood in the kitchen, the fireplace casting a warm glow on their faces. Then Clara stepped forward and hugged him, a short but tight embrace, as if trying to transfer all her faith directly into him. James wrapped his arms around her, feeling a warmth he never thought he'd feel again. "If it weren't for you," he whispered, voice low and rough, "I wouldn't have survived that winter." Clara pulled back slightly, her smile glowing. "You're stronger than you think, James. I just gave you a place to rest." She turned back to the stove, but James gently held her hand, stopping her. "You don't understand," he said, his voice steady. "You didn't just give me shelter. You gave me hope. You gave me a reason to start again." He squeezed her hand, eyes sincere. "I don't know how to repay you." Clara smiled, soft and unwavering. "You don't owe me anything. Just keep going, that's enough." She tugged his hand, leading him to the table. "We were supposed to celebrate more properly tonight, but dinner's ready. Sit down before the soup gets cold." James laughed, heart full. "To me, every meal you cook is a 5-star feast." Clara blushed, chuckling quietly. That night they sat together, sharing a dinner that tasted more joyful than anything James had eaten in years. Clara told him about a funny patient at the hospital, and James laughed a sound he hadn't heard from himself in so long. "You're good at making people laugh," he said, sipping his soup. "I bet the hospital is lucky to have you." Clara shrugged with a mischievous grin. "As long as they don't drive me crazy. What about you? What's next with that big contract?" James looked at her, eyes full of light. "I'm going to expand the company, move into a bigger space, hire more people, build better software. But I want you to be part of it, Clara. Not as an employee, as a friend, a partner." Clara blinked, surprised, setting her spoon down. "Me? In your company. James, I'm just a nurse. I don't know anything about tech. But you understand people, James said firmly. You know what matters. That's what I need most. He smiled. Just think about it, okay? Clara nodded, smiling softly. I'll think about it, but don't expect me to wear a suit to meetings. They both laughed, and for the first time, the little wooden house didn't feel lonely anymore. Outside the window, snow still fell, but inside James's heart, something had taken root, a seed of hope, warmed by Clara, the quiet light that had guided him through the coldest winter of his life. Rain drizzled against the office window, streaking down the glass like memories James thought he'd buried. The neon glow from the street below cast a pale light on his face as he sat at his desk, flipping through documents in preparation for the upcoming trial. The lawsuit against Lucas wasn't just a chance to reclaim what was taken, it was a way to close a painful chapter of his life. Lately, the media couldn't get enough of him. James Bennett, from rock bottom to the top again, the reborn hero of the business world. Just months ago, he'd been a man with nothing but the clothes on his back. Now, thanks to the Med Global contract, he was back in the spotlight. James set the papers down and leaned back in his chair. His gaze drifted to a small photo on his desk, one he had secretly taken of Clara as she watered the white chrysanthemums on the porch of her wooden cottage. Her smile, soft and rare like sunlight in winter, was what made every victory meaningful. She still visited after her shifts, bringing paperwork, sometimes a homemade meal. You built an empire once. You'll do it again, she had said, and now he had. But beyond the business and the headlines, what gave him peace was having Clara beside him. That morning, Daniel, his lawyer and the only friend he truly trusted, walked into the office with a rare smile. The board just sent this, Daniel said, placing a thick envelope on the desk. They want you back as CEO. They know they were wrong to turn their backs on you. James picked up the envelope, his fingers brushing the company seal, one from the empire he'd built with his bare hands. He smiled, but his thoughts immediately turned to Clara. He wanted to share this with her, to see her eyes light up the way they had when she congratulated him on the Med Global deal. In the little wooden house, Clara sat by the fireplace, hands wrapped around a warm mug of ginger tea. The evening news had just aired an interview with James following Lucas's trial. He had appeared on screen composed and dignified, clad in a sharp black suit, his voice calm as he spoke of his legal victory. Lucas had been sentenced for financial fraud, stripped of his power and reputation, and Vivian, once James's fiancée, had been pulled into the scandal. The press was merciless, labeling her a traitor and an opportunist. Clara smiled at the news that James had recovered most of his assets. He deserved it after everything he'd endured. But her smile faded quickly. Watching him on television, basking in the spotlight, surrounded by cameras and applause, Clara felt something distant between them, an invisible divide. James was now the James Bennett the city admired. And she, just a nurse in worn-out white shoes, living in her grandmother's aging cottage, with simple dreams of a quiet life. She had been his light when he was in darkness, but now that he had found his way back to the top, did she still belong in his world? She stood, grabbed the folder of documents James had asked her to edit. Tired from a long shift, she still wanted to help. She threw on her old coat, pulled her knit hat over her ears, and rode her bicycle through the glittering city streets. The wind bit cold, but she didn't care. She just wanted to see him for a moment to tell him she was proud. James was reorganizing his desk when a knock echoed from the door. He frowned and checked the time, nearly 9 p.m. Too late for an appointment. He opened the door, and his heart stilled. Vivian stood there, pale beneath the hallway lights. The red dress she wore once, his favorite, now only reminded him of painful memories. Her eyes were red and swollen, mascara streaked like the rain outside. She trembled, voice cracking. James, please hear me out. I was wrong. Lucas manipulated me. But now I see everything clearly. I can't live without you. Please, give me another chance. James gripped the doorframe, eyes icy. What are you doing here, Vivian? His voice was razor sharp. You and Lucas took everything from me. What more do you want? She stepped forward, collapsing against him, clutching his shirt as if it were her last hope. I know I don't deserve it, but I love you, James. I was a fool to choose Lucas, to walk away from you. Please forgive me. He stood stiff, unmoving. Her words, once capable of cutting him to pieces, now meant nothing. He gently pulled her arms away, about to respond when he heard a soft sound from the end of the hallway. Clara stood there, clutching the folder to her chest, eyes wide with shock. Her coat was soaked with rain, hair stuck to her forehead. Her gaze shifted from Vivian, still holding on to him, to James. She didn't say a word, but the pain in her eyes pierced him. "Clara," James croaked, stepping forward, but she turned away. The folder slipped from her arms, pages scattering like white petals caught in the wind. She ran toward the stairs, her small figure swallowed by the dark. "Clara, wait!" James shouted, rushing after her. But Vivian grabbed his arm. "James, don't go! Who is she? Just some ordinary nurse. She can't give you anything." He turned, eyes burning with anger. "You don't get to talk about her," he growled. "She's the only one who stayed when everyone, including you, turned away." Without another word, James tore himself free and ran outside. Rain lashed his face, but it couldn't numb the pain in his chest. Clara had misunderstood she'd seen Vivian in his arms, and he knew that, for someone as gentle as her, that one moment was enough to break everything. Clara ran through the wet streets, white sneakers slipping on the glistening pavement. Vivian's arms around James haunted her like a broken reel of film. Vivian was beautiful, sophisticated. She belonged in James's world. And Clara? Just a nurse from the outskirts, with a heart too naive. She stopped at the old bus stop, the same place she had found James nearly a year ago. The rusty roof still dripped, the wooden bench still cold. Clara sat, buried her face in her hands, and let the tears fall. She had tried not to love him, tried to stay just a friend, but her heart hadn't listened. Every laugh, every accidental touch had drawn her deeper into something she couldn't control. "I don't belong in his world. I never did," she whispered to herself, her heart breaking not because of Vivian, but because the gap between her and James felt too wide to cross. She stood, ready to walk away for good. "Clara!" James's voice rang out. She looked up, saw him running toward her, shirt soaked, hair plastered to his forehead. He stopped in front of her, breathless, panic in his eyes. "Clara, please listen. It's not what you think." She shook her head, voice trembling. "I saw enough, James. She's the woman you once loved, isn't she? The one from the engagement photo. She belongs in your world. And me, I'm just someone passing through." James dropped to his knees in the rain, ignoring the cold that soaked his clothes. He grasped her hands even as she tried to pull away. "Clara, look at me. Vivian means nothing to me now. She betrayed me. She broke me. But you gave me a reason to keep living. You're the one who said, 'Come with me,' when I had nowhere left to go." Clara bit her lip, trying to hold back sobs. "But you're getting everything back. James, the CEO title, the company, the respect. I don't belong in that world. I can't stand beside you." James held her tighter, voice shaking. "I don't want that world without you in it. I won't promise you everything, but I'll give you my everything, my heart, my time, my future if you'll just stay." She looked into his eyes and saw truth, vulnerability, fear, but also love. Still, her heart ached. She gently pulled her hand free and stood. "I need time, James. I don't know." She walked away, leaving James kneeling in the rain, watching as she carried what felt like the last piece of his soul into the night. The rain kept falling, washing the streets clean, but no storm could wash away the hurt now separating them. You're watching Soul Stories exclusive to our channel. If you're still with us, drop a comment we read and cherish them all. Subscribe to support more heartfelt, original stories. Thanks for being part of the Soul Stories family. The rain had stopped, but the air in Clara's tiny wooden house remained heavy, as if an invisible storm still pressed against its walls. A soft glow from the old desk lamp lit up the kitchen table where Clara sat, her hand trembling as she gripped a pen. In front of her lay a blank sheet of paper, smudged with scribbles she had written and erased, each line an attempt to say what her heart refused to accept. Beside the paper sat an old brass key, the key to the house her grandmother had left her. It had once been a home filled with warmth, laughter, and memories shared with James. Now it weighed in her palm like the weight of all the moments she wanted to forget. She wrote, crossed out the words, then tried again. In the end, her letter was painfully short. James, I don't belong in your world. I'm just a nurse, living a simple life, and you deserve more than I could ever give. Be happy. Clara. She folded the note, placed it on the table, and stood. She didn't take much, just an old backpack with a few clothes and her grandmother's recipe journal. She gave the house one last look. The fireplace still held the faint warmth of last night's fire, and the white chrysanthemums on the back porch bloomed stubbornly despite the oncoming winter. Clara closed the door behind her and didn't look back. James returned to the little wooden house the next morning, his chest still heavy from the night before. The image of Clara running into the rain, her eyes filled with pain, haunted him. He had called, sent texts, but her phone remained out of service. When he opened the door, the silence hit him like a punch. No soft humming from the kitchen, no scent of ginger tea, no Clara. On the table, the brass key and her letter lay like a farewell carved into stone. James picked up the note, reading each word slowly, feeling the ground beneath him give way. I don't belong in your world. The words cut like a blade, but he knew they weren't true. Clara hadn't left because she didn't belong. She left because she thought he no longer needed her. He scoured the city, visited the hospital where she worked, the cafes she used to mention, even asked the vendors near the old bus stop. No one had seen her. A nurse said Clara had resigned the night before, leaving no forwarding address. Every day, James returned to the wooden house, hoping to find her standing on the back porch among the white chrysanthemums. But the house remained still, empty. Time passed, slow and unkind. James threw himself into work to numb the pain. The board, now fully aware of their mistake, repeatedly asked him to return as CEO. He finally agreed, not for status, but because he needed something to keep going. His new company, born from the ashes of the old one, flourished. A year later, he merged it with the original firm, creating an even stronger empire. But every night, when the office lights were off and the city quieted, James sat alone with the only photo he had kept from those dark days. A candid picture of Clara watering flowers on the porch. Her smile, soft and radiant, was the only thing that kept him from falling apart completely. He had hired investigators, sent messages through every channel, but Clara had vanished as if she had never existed. Sometimes he wondered, was she happy? Was she still thinking about him? 1 year after Clara left, the city sparkled with lights, celebrating the merger of James's two companies. The Grand Hall buzzed with reporters, investors, and employees. James stood on stage in a crisp black suit, but his eyes betrayed the emptiness inside. He took the microphone, his voice steady, low and clear. 1 year ago, I lost everything. My name, my company, and my belief in life. I didn't think I'd recover. But during the coldest night of my life, someone reached out and pulled me from the dark. The room fell silent. She didn't just give me shelter, she gave me hope. She gave me a reason to go on. James paused, drew a deep breath, as if pulling courage from the depths of his soul. If she's listening, wherever she is, I want her to know I've never stopped looking for her. And if there's one thing I regret most, it's not holding on to her when I had the chance. I'll be waiting at the place where she first found me, and I'll wait there until I see her again. The cameras rolled, broadcasting his words live. James bowed and stepped off the stage to thunderous applause, but all he felt was the hollow ache of someone still missing. He didn't know if Clara was watching or if she had long since left the city behind. In a quiet town hundreds of miles away, Clara sat in a small rented room, watching the broadcast on an old television. She had moved there after leaving the city, working at a modest clinic and living quietly. She had tried to forget James, but every white flower, every whiff of ginger tea brought him rushing back. His voice cut through the news broadcast and straight into her heart. She looked up and saw him on the screen. His eyes still carried the sorrow she had once tried so hard to soothe. When he spoke about the woman who had saved him, her tears came suddenly, unstoppable. She covered her face, sobbing. She had left to protect him, to let him thrive in the world she believed she didn't belong to. But now, hearing those words, she realized she had been wrong. He didn't need the spotlight. He needed her. Clara stood up, wiped her tears, and looked out the window at the night. Tonight, she would go back to the old bus stop where it had all begun. She didn't know if James would be there, but she needed to believe that fate would bring them together once more. Night fell over the small town, bringing with it the chill of the approaching winter. Clara stood at the door of her rented room, clutching her old coat tightly, her heart heavy with the words James had spoken on the evening news. His voice echoed in her mind, deep, warm, yet filled with longing. If she's listening, somewhere out there, I want her to know I never stopped looking for her. For a year, she had tried to bury her feelings, living quietly in this town, working at a small clinic, avoiding everything that reminded her of him. But just a few words from his heart had shattered the wall she had built, reigniting the flame of yearning she thought had gone cold. The room still smelled faintly of chamomile tea. A chipped porcelain cup sat quietly on the table next to a white daisy she had picked that morning. The old television had been turned off, but the image of James, his eyes full of longing and hope, remained etched in her memory. Clara took a deep breath, put on her coat, pulled her beanie over her ears, and stepped outside. The night was pitch dark, lit only by the dim yellow glow of streetlights. She brought nothing with her but a fierce determination. She had to return to the bus stop, where she had once found him, where their story had begun. She didn't know if James would be there, but her heart told her she had to go. The last bus from the town to the city rocked along the bumpy country road. Clara sat by the window, watching misty fields drift past, her heart a mix of fear and longing. A year ago she had left, leaving behind a key and a letter, thinking it was the best way to protect James, to let him live in a world of glory and power. But now she knew she had been wrong. He didn't need fame, he needed her, just as she needed him, more fiercely than anything she had ever known. The city gleamed with lights, but the old bus stop still stood lonely by the deserted road. The rusty tin roof dripped from a recent drizzle, the wooden bench cold under the dim streetlight. James stood there, leaning against a pillar, his black coat damp with night dew. He had come here every evening since the company merger speech, clinging to the faint hope that Clara would hear his words. In his coat pocket, his fingers brushed a small silver ring, a simple gift he had chosen because it reminded him of her. Unpretentious but full of meaning. The night breeze carried the scent of rain and memories. James closed his eyes and Clara's image came vividly to mind. The girl in the old coat, shaking him awake in the winter night, her voice gentle but resolute. Come with me. Back then, he was a broken man, homeless and hopeless. But she had given him shelter, a reason to keep going. Now he stood here, his heart burning with the desire to see her, to hold her, to make up for the time they had lost. The soft sound of footsteps pulled James from his thoughts. He opened his eyes and his heart skipped a beat. Clara stood at the edge of the shelter, her coat wet with dew, her hair loose around her pale face. Her eyes, red from dried tears, met his. Time stood still, just the two of them, under the faint light. Clara, his voice was hoarse, as if afraid she might vanish if he spoke too loudly. She stepped forward, her hands trembling at her sides. I heard you, she said, voice choked. On TV. Your speech. I didn't expect you were still looking for me. James stepped closer but stopped a step away, afraid to startle her. I never stopped, he said, voice thick with emotion. Not a single day, Clara. I've been everywhere, asking everyone, hoping to find you. I'm sorry for that night, for what you saw. Vivian means nothing. She's a part of the past I've left behind. You're the one I need, the one I long for every day. Clara bit her lip, eyes on her worn-out white shoes, fingers twisting her coat hem. I thought leaving was the best thing for you, she whispered. You're a CEO, with the world ahead of you. And me. I'm just a nurse, living in an old house, with nothing to give you. I was scared I wasn't enough. Scared one day you'd realize that. James shook his head, stepped forward, and gently took her hand. Her hand was icy, but he held it tightly, as if to warm her with his own. Clara, look at me, he said, his voice soft but firm. My world isn't boardrooms or spotlights. My world is your wooden house, the crackling fireplace, the white daisies on your porch. You gave me everything when I had nothing. You're everything more than I ever dreamed. Tears spilled from Clara's eyes, trailing down her cheeks. She wanted to believe him, but fear still clung to her. But I left you, she sobbed. I ran away because I was too scared to face it. How can you still want me after all that? James reached into his pocket and pulled out the small silver ring. He held it between them, its sheen catching the streetlight. The night you found me, you said, "Come with me." You saved me, Clara, not just once, but every day after. Now it's my turn. His voice trembled, but his gaze never wavered. Come with me, not to a world of glamour, but a life we can build together. I won't promise you the world, but I promise I'll give you all of mine to make you happy. Please, don't leave me again. Clara stared at the ring, her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't flashy, but it carried a sincere promise, a future where she didn't have to feel out of place. She looked up and saw not just love in James's eyes, but a fire burning, intense, ready to erase the distance of the past year. Her guarded heart finally opened. She stepped forward, closing the space between them, and before he could say more, she wrapped her arms around his neck and pulled him close. Their kiss wasn't gentle, wasn't hesitant. It was fierce, fiery, as if they were making up for every missed moment, every lonely night, every unshed tear. His lips were warm, holding her tightly, his arms around her waist, drawing her close like he feared she might disappear. Clara could feel his heartbeat, strong and fast, mirroring hers, joining in a silent yearning. That kiss was a promise, a reconciliation, a flame melting winter's chill and the pain of the past. They pulled away, breath mingling in the cold air. Clara rested her forehead on his shoulder and whispered, "I've waited a year to hear you say that. I don't want to run anymore." James smiled, his eyes lighting up like never before. He gently slid the silver ring onto her finger, its weight light, but sure, like his vow. He kissed her forehead, then held her tightly, his warmth wrapping around her. "Stay with me," he said, voice husky. "Forever," she answered, her voice steady for the first time in months. Misty rain began to fall again, pattering on the roof above them, but neither moved. The bus stop, once a witness to heartbreak, had become the place of their new beginning. They stood there, hand in hand, fingers entwined, the city fading behind them. The rain washed away the pain of the past year, leaving only the promise of tomorrow. The next morning, Clara brought James back to her grandmother's wooden house. The fireplace still crackled, and the white daisies on the porch were still in bloom, as if the year of separation had never happened. Clara opened the door, and the scent of ginger tea and old wood filled the air, bringing back memories of their days together. She turned to him and smiled. "Welcome home." James pulled her into his arms and whispered, "Thank you for giving me a home." The little wooden house, bathed in early winter sunlight, became the place where they began again, not as a CEO and a nurse, but as two souls who had found each other through the rain.